So thank you very much. I will just accept this. Yeah. Okay. Gira. Okay, so thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. So this is what I'm going to present today is part of my doctoral project, and is a tiny part of it and the concluding part of it. So I hope it will make sense to you, although it is part of a wider and broader project. So what I'm focusing on is the integration, as the title goes, the integration of immigrant origin youth in Japan. So we are in a different geographical area from what we have discussed today, although we will find that we have some points in common with geographically and also well, in some points of it where I'm going also to touch on what has been already been said today. So the whole doctoral project wishes to understand whether any existing immigration theory regarding integration of immigrants can be applied or is valid to explain what's happening also in the Japanese scenario. And I decided to explore this research puzzle by focusing on second generations, although I will also have some third generation youth. And I also decided to focus mainly on the school arena as a privileged ground of exploration for this thematic. And of course, interviews. So I have completely qualitative method approach to the research, and interviews have explored several areas. So not only regarding school, also family relations, family background, peers, networks, and so on. Also identity formation. Although today I'm only going to present you some aspects of school and school integration. Of course, the broader goal is to participate in the understanding of immigrants' way of incorporation. I have to say I haven't written it out patently in the slides, but in Japan academic literature, only around 2010, we start to have some theoretical effort to try to explain how immigrants integrate in the country. So it's still a pretty new research in the country, and they haven't so far produced anything very different, theoretically speaking, from the models we have in the Western academia, so in the North American, European academia. So I'm sorry, but you have to bear with me because I think I have to give you some descriptive introduction. Basically, I'm maybe telling you just a little bit, just a few minutes of what's the immigration history, immigration panorama in the country, because I'm not sure you're familiar with it. I would be surprised if you are. And also just very briefly about the Japanese school system. And maybe when we talk about that, I will also tell you what this picture is about. So who are the immigrants in Japan today, and when did Japanese immigration start? Sorry, my English also is pulling up a little bit. So we have a kind of first, let's call wave, although I don't really like this word, inflow of immigrant, which was a direct consequence of Japanese colonialism. You know, Japan is the only country in the Asian region that has colonized its Asian neighbors. And as a consequence of that, there was a wave, let's call it inflow of forced migrants, especially from, of course, the Korean Peninsula and also from the Manchuria area. So you have Korean and Chinese immigrants. And today you still have like second, third, and fourth generations consequences as a result of this period. And then you have a second wave, and this is the first point in contact we have with first presenters of this morning, because at the beginning, actually, of the 20th century, we had, Japan had several bilateral agreements with North America, Australia, and Latin American countries. At a certain point, Australia just closed the door. North America, you know, you have the yellow band, also North America closed the door, and one of the few countries that kept accepting Japanese immigrants were Latin American country and especially Brazilian. So this is why you would be kind of a surprise, but this is why you have a consistent community of Latin American immigrants still today in Japan and Brazilian. And the Brazilian, Peruvian immigrants you have today actually are descendants of those Japanese immigrants that migrated in Latin America at the beginning of the 20th century. Although today, and this is 2010, you have also Vietnamese, Filipino, so the situation of the immigrant communities is becoming more and more diversified. Why is important Japan? Well, one of the points is that what future projections. So sorry, you see 2019 the immigrant population in Japan is just 2.2% of their whole population. So we still have not reached the numbers we have in Europe. We still have not reached the numbers we have in North America or Australia. Although projections seems to state or to argue that research might actually be pioneering research now to see it. We will have maybe in 20 years reaching numbers that we have in the European scenario right now. So let's hope research done now is going to be consistent and important for future years to come. So the second point I wish to explain to you is how the school system works, because that's where I based and that's where my research is grounded. It's not too far away from our school system. You have well, early education, but then you have primary and lower secondary school, so basically elementary, scuole medie, which is the compulsory schooling for Japanese students, the Japanese youth. So primary school is 6 years, then you have 3 years, of lower secondary schools and 3 years of upper secondary school. So for the Italian audience here, they basically finish 1 year earlier than Italian students concerning scuole superiori. But then what we have and what is here is that Japan showed this kind of unique phenomenon of having school for foreigners. They are also called, this school for foreigners is a literal translation, Gaikokujin Gakko, which is school for foreigners. And they're also called in the English literature, they're called ethnic schools. And they're mainly schools for Korean, Chinese, and Brazilian, and actually these are the 3 nationalities I'm focusing on for this research. And the school for foreigners are mainly private. They are hardly recognized by the Japanese government. That means they are not eligible for subsidies, so they are not eligible for funds. So students applying for these schools have to pay everything from their pockets. And everything is taught in the language of the country of reference. So if you have Korean schools, they're taught in Korean. If it's Chinese, they're taught in Chinese. And if it's Brazilian, they're taught in, the curriculum is taught in Portuguese. Okay, so you will see how this might also impact a child going through Portuguese education, a child going through Korean education. We will see what might be the consequence, not only linguistically, for linguistic integration. And another very important point is that in Japan, for foreign citizens students, foreign citizen youth, school is not compulsory, which means that the government is not going to check whether a Brazilian citizen student is attending school or not, or Korean or Chinese or whatever. So these are very basic elements, which I think will help you understand where we are set. And sorry, going back to this picture, this was one of the few chances I had to visit one of the schools. This was actually a public Japanese school, but set in a Kawasaki, which is just outside the very center of Tokyo, and where there's a quite consistent community of Koreans. And as such, teachers actually decided to have an after school concerning like Korean courses, Korean language, to also enable these children to preserve some of of the original, traditions, songs, and so on. And I don't know if you're familiar with, but this is pretty much, so this is an after-school show, and I was invited to assist in that. And the teacher, she has a hanbok, which is a Korean, very visible Korean dress. And also the students have this hair ornament, which is also very Korean. I don't know if you see in the tamburi, how do you say? Drums. In the drums, it's actually the Korean yin-yang, the Korean version of yin-yang symbol, which is like the three heavens, humans, and earth. It's very, very interesting, but we will go to that. Actually, also in the background, it's also very Korean. So you have the Jeju Islands. So, and this was supposed to be one of my starting points to get in contact with this reality. Sadly, I was not invited anymore as I was. Anyway, we will go deep into that. But for COVID, basically, I could not continue my field work in there. So back to the research. I told you already, my methodology is 100% qualitative. I conducted semi-structured interviews with second generations. I'm going to give you the detail in a sec. And I reached a sample of 61 interviews. I went through, well, I also have, thanks to the help of Max QDA, it would have been very, very much long, way longer to analyze such interviews without that. And regarding recipient selection, I went for the 2029 age class. In Japan, now the law is changing, but in Japan, the adult age is reached by 20, not 18. So that helped me with, to erase all the bureaucratic burdens. They had to be, the respondents selected had to be child of both foreign parents. So both foreign parents had to be either Brazilian, either Chinese or Korean. I decided to go from generation 1.5 onward, so I didn't kind of selected generation 1.25, for instance, which means that students, that means that the selected participants were at least from junior high school already in the country, and not from senior high school. Okay, so they had some year in the scholastic in the school system in Japan. Otherwise, it would have been maybe too late for them to recollect any memories of it. I already told you, focusing on Korean, Chinese, and Brazilian, but I also interviewed a group of Japanese, native Japanese youth, the same age gap, the same age group, class age, and I use these as a control group, and we will see how that will result. So for today, I brought you what I analyzed through the typological lens. So I decided to build a typology, together, of course, with my supervisor help to help me going through a straight line. And so I built a typology. Of course, the typology is not the result of it. The typology is only a tool to help me simplify the reality and how varied it is, how varied the sample was. And I selected, to build such a typology, I selected two variables that helped me identify 4 types. So the two variables, one is the educational and academic aspirations of respondents. Of course, everything was asked in a retrospective way. So when you were in high school, when you were in junior high school. And familial support. So these are the two variables. And the first variable was divided into whether aspirations or respondents' aspirations were instrumental or attitudinal. And the familial support was divided whether there was familial support for this, to carry out this decision, or to help students or youth select what kind of path they would go through. So whether there was or not. And let me go through that. Okay, sorry, I forgot to mention that regarding educational aspiration, what do I mean with instrumental and attitudinal? The first one regards aspirations or aspirations that were instrumental or very functional to how much spendable that credential was in the labor market in later years. Whereas attitudinal aspiration were based on personal preferences or respondents, or personal attitudes where I was good at languages, therefore I just went for that career, or I was good at music, that's why I decided, or I always looked forward to be a psychologist, so I wanted to study psychology and I went for that without effectively evaluating whether it was spendable or not in the labor market. And I gave fictional names to these 4 types. The first one, therefore, the guided type of youth, are those youth that were guided by instrumental aspirations and also were supported by their parents. Sorry, I also forgot to mention, I don't know, how much do we have time? How much time do I have? But I forgot to mention that, 5 minutes, okay, that I decided not to include economic formal support. So that's not in there. If I have time, I will explain also why, but let's go into the types presentation. So the guided had instrumental aspiration and was supported by the family. They were the largest group. So you see 19 out of 43 are the total foreign national youth were included in this type. It was mainly, you see C, K, B, so the biggest part was Chinese, Korean, and the least were Brazilian respondents that were categorized as guided youth. And actually the whole group displayed a quite high educational credential. So they were either, they graduated from, mostly from universities. They also, almost everyone in this group showed to have a quite high socioeconomical standing, so socioeconomic position, translated in the kind of job they have, so long-term employment, essentially. And so let me skip the last point, is that the important thing here is that also the Japanese control group actually would have been categorized as guided group, as guided youth. So we can say that instrumental, the guided immigrant origin youth are the closest in their profile to native Japanese youth. And the second point, so going down, the second group is going with the flow. I decided to give, maybe it's a little bit of way too long a title, but I think it fits perfectly the youths included in this group. So they have not been supported by their family in the decision-making process of what kind of educational path to follow, but they also were guided by instrumental aspirations. And they are the second most numerous group, quite interesting. And here we already see one important point. We have mainly Brazilian, followed by Chinese and Korean. And this actually reflects the fact that Chinese family in the first place, but then also Korean, so it's a characteristic of Asian respondents, had families that pushed them to follow a certain academic and educational path, whereas many of the Brazilian respondents reported that their family were not very interested or didn't really play a big part, an important role in guiding them towards a specific or pushing them towards a specific educational path. Okay, let me go to the third type, the supported one. It's only, here is the least numerous group. I have only 5 respondents that fit in this group, mainly Brazilian and Korean, and only 1 Chinese. And here we start to have to present a lower educational credential and lower socioeconomic positioning. Especially the Brazilian showing the least preferable, the worst educational credential and the worst socioeconomic positioning. And these, the supported ones are supported by their parents, but actually in following their own attitudinal preferences regarding what academic and what educational path they would follow. And lastly, the independent one, basically they did not receive any support from the family, and they followed what they thought was their own preferences without really understanding whether it was spendable or not in the labor market later on. and they are the worst positioned youth, both educationally and both occupationally speaking. And the curious part is, I mean, the interesting thing is that only for this group, what was consistent was that parents had actually low credentials, low educational credential, and low occupational positioning. And whereas for the other three groups, there was not really any correlation between, familial background were pretty varied pretty much from the other types. So it was not really consistent to state whether familial background could be correlated somehow to youth, both educational and economic occupational positioning. So just because I have to wrap up very fast, overall what has emerged is that although this four types has been identified, there's still be a very clear-cut difference between Asian respondents, so Chinese and the Korean respondents, both in terms of educational credential and economic positioning, and versus Brazilian respondents. Within these, what has emerged, I told you before we spoke about ethnic schools, and I hadn't, of course, there was not the occasion here to speak in detail about ethnic schools, but having attended an ethnic schools seems to have played a negative role in determining what social economic positioning, especially Brazilian youth. Whereas for Korean, having attended an ethnic school seems to not have played any negative or positive role. And also what I was, I already stated about I already talked about familial background. There was not a strong correlation. Actually, I was quite surprised at the very beginning when I built a typology. It might be that typology is maybe not working for observing these, but it was important to see that it was. It seems to have played a role in determining the downward mobility for independent youth, which is the last identified type. And so I'm sorry, I hope I was not too confusing and not too long, but thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I think you aroused a lot of people's curiosity about the Japanese school system and foreign origin students' experiences there. But now we go to the second paper by Deborah Mantovani, who I already introduced before, Associate Professor of Sociology at the Department of Political and Social Science of the University of Bologna. You have the floor and
okay, thank you very much. And I want to say immediately that I would really appreciate your suggestions, because this presentation presents some preliminary findings, and this is a sort of methodological exercise in order to see within the Italian population if some students, so we are in the field of the education system, if some students are defined as Italians, but they have an immigrant origin or a foreign origin. And when I say immigrant origin, I refer to the fact that the student may have experienced personally the phenomenon of migration or his parents. And with foreign origin, I refer to the fact that the student and at least one of his parents were non-Italian or are non-Italian citizens. Okay, so we know that in Italy, the law number 91, promoted in 1992, rules the acquisition of the Italian citizenship here, and this is a sort of anachronistic reform because it facilitates the acquisition of Italian citizenship for people that have one Italian ancestor. And at the opposite, it hinders the acquisition of Italian citizenship for those who are immigrants here, especially non-EU citizens, because according to the law, you have to reside here in Italy permanently at least 10 years before applying for achieving the Italian citizenship. So the jus sanguinis rules the acquisition of Italian citizenship, so we can suppose that the problem of Italians that have a foreign origin or an immigrant origin is not so problematic. Of course, we cannot compare our situation to the situation that there is, for example, in the United States. But I wanted to explore if this phenomenon is in play or not. And at the beginning of the 80s, some scholars began to ask themselves if this is a problem, and they usually used two dimensions in order to estimate this type of population: the citizenship, of course, and the country of birth of the student, of the person that is investigated. But according to some recent research, other additional information should be taken into account, such as, for example, the citizenship at birth of the student in this case, and you can also include the three dimensions related to the characteristics of the parents, more precisely the current citizenship, the citizenship at birth, and the place of birth. So we need to combine all these dimensions, and this is possible, thanks to the census data, which collects this type of information. But I'm not as lucky as Roberto, who can have access to this data easily, because here we can say that this is a nightmare to obtain this data. So the people that I consider are from 0 to 18. And this selection has some limits because the census data do not include information as regards the school attended by students. So we don't have this type of information. So I define, for example, students who are enrolled in primary school according to their age, from 6 to 10. And this may produce some problems regarding the actual population, especially for non-Italian students. Sometimes non-Italian students can be overestimated or underestimated because, for example, we know that non-Italian students, especially at the highest level of education, have a higher propensity to fail at school. So at the upper secondary school, I should include those who are not 18 years old, but that are older. But I cannot do this. So this is a limit. And then I also selected children of the head of household and or his her spouse or cohabitant partner. So I need to select only children because only for children I can have access to the information of the citizen, current citizenship, previous citizenship, and place of birth of the parents. Okay, so, and data is dated by now, but these census include the entire population because now Istat produces these statistics sampling the Italian population. So I have 4 questions. The first one is, to what extent are students with an immigrant and or origin, foreign origin, underestimated by official statistics? Because school define non-Italian students according to their current citizenship only. So non-Italian or Italian student. Which groups of immigrant, students are the most underestimated? and I want to explore if the phenomenon of naturalization is in play. And I also want to see if there are any differences according to the different levels of education and along the peninsula. Okay, so if I just take a look at the current citizenship, so schools say that in 2011, 9 million students were Italians, whereas almost 1 million were non-Italians. And now I try to include the different dimensions. The first step is to pay attention just to the characteristics of the student. So citizenship at census, citizenship at birth, and country of birth. And I'm very interested in these two categories, which represent naturalized Italians. So if I was born here in Italy and I was non-Italian at birth, but then I became Italian, I can suppose that here I have a foreign origin, and I need to investigate this group. And in this case, I was born abroad, so I could be, for example, a first generation. I experienced migration. Okay, so here, if I just take a look at these three dimensions, I can say that there is, that the picture doesn't change a lot, because the starting point, there are 9 million Italians, and then here almost 9 million are still Italians. But there are some groups which deserve our attention, especially here. I can suppose that these people are descendants, Italians descendants, because I was born abroad, I'm Italian since ever, and so maybe my parents are from Argentina or other countries of emigration, of Italian immigration. Whereas here I have people that can have problems in the educational integration, in the school integration, because they may have a background, an immigrant or a foreign background from country of immigration towards Italy. If I take a look at the numbers here, and I compare the data with the previous census, I can say that the phenomenon is not so relevant numerically, but it is increasing. And if I take a look at the latest data in 2020, 1,600,000 people were naturalized Italians, whereas 10 years before they were only 600,000. So maybe we need to investigate these groups. And here there is the attempt to organize the 9 dimensions related to student and parents. Here you can see the characteristics of the parents, and in this first row, I consider the citizenship of the parents. So both may be Italian since ever, or one parent has been naturalized Italian and the other one is Italian since ever. So this is sort of mixed couple. One parent Italian since birth and the other one is still non-Italian. One parent naturalized Italian and the other one non-Italian citizen, and here I have both non-Italian citizens. And then I need to take into account the place of birth of parents. So both were born in Italy, or at least one was born abroad. So 100% Italians are defined by the green cell, whereas the others combination may be classified, and if you have tips, suggestions, I would appreciate them. Here there are students that deserve to be investigated because these people are naturalized Italians. And here I suppose that here there are Italians descendants, whereas here should be Italian descendants, but there is a question mark, because if you pay attention to the characteristics of the parents, one parent is now Italian. So one parent achieved the Italian citizenship and the other one is non-Italian. So I can suppose that here, for example, there is a mix of there is a couple of Moroccan people. One achieved the Italian citizenship, the other one is still Moroccan, and according to the legislation, the child achieved the Italian citizenship due to iuris communicatio, because if one parent is Italian, this citizenship may be given to the child. So if I use these additional dimensions connected to the characteristics of the parents, I can see that the number of Italians, real Italians, I don't know how to say, decreases, and there are only 8 million Italians instead of 9 million. So maybe we need to investigate these groups. Okay. And now I skip the adopted children, and now I need to look inside these different categories and pay attention to the country of origin or the citizenship of origin of these people. So naturalized Italian born in Italy with foreign and or migrant origin, if I take a look at the three most popular national origins, there are Moroccans or ex-Moroccans, Albanians and Tunisians, which means that these people have an origin that is related to the countries of immigration towards Italy, and they may experience problems in the education system. And if I take a look at the different characteristics of the parents, the nationalities are the same. So this is a sort of homogeneous group. If I take a look at ex-first generation, so people born abroad, here the composition of nationalities is different. The first group is characterized by people from Argentina or with an Argentinian background, and then Moroccans and Brazilians. So there are some people that may be descendants of Italians, whereas others are children of people who migrated to Italy. And here there are some additional differences, because according to the characteristics of parents, the origin of these children changes. If I take a look here at Italian descendants, in general, I would say that if I consider all these people that have these characteristics, they are actually Italian descendants. Most of them are from Switzerland, Germany, or French, that are countries of emigration for Italians. But there is still this question mark that I want to explore. And if I take a look at these people, that are 24,000 more or less, I see that they are from Morocco, Albania, or Tunisia. So I can say that these are not Italian descendants. So maybe pay attention to the characteristics of parents could be very important in order to estimate the actual dimensions of people, children with foreign origin, in order to promote some policies for the integration, school integration of these people. But I don't have any information as regards their ability in speaking Italian or other characteristics like that. And here, if I just pay attention to students born abroad, that I could consider Italian descendants as well, I see the same pattern. According to the different characteristics of parents, there are some national origin that changes significantly. So the last attempt, here I can skip, is to investigate if the distribution of these people is different according to the different levels of education. So I just consider those students who are defined by official statistics as Italians because they have the Italian citizenship. But if I take a look at the characteristics of their parents, they have foreign origin or immigrant origin. So these are the people that are included in this number and these cases. Okay, if I take a look at the distribution, if I just take a look at the current citizenship, this is the distribution of non-Italians in the different levels of education. If I take a look at the distribution of those who are defined as Italians but have a foreign or an immigrant origin, I can see, for example, that they are more represented in primary school and lower secondary schools. So there is a different distribution. So their impact on the education system may vary according to the different levels of education. And then if I take a look at the distribution along the peninsula, this result is completely expected because there is a higher concentration in the northwest and in the northeast, whereas the concentration of these people is lower in the center and in the south of Italy, because we know that the distribution of immigrant population is uneven and is higher in the northern region where their labor integration is easier. So here, to sum up, maybe according to this data and according to the trend that we are observing, we need to pay attention to these naturalized Italians because they may experience some problems at school in terms of integration. And in order to explore this phenomenon, we need to pay attention to the different country of origin, because we know that there is a very heterogeneous population, and their distribution is not even in the different levels of education, and is not even in the different areas of the country. So maybe in order to promote their integration, there are some policies that need to be tailored on the specific characteristics of the different territories. And these questions are for you, but I have additional questions. And that's it. Thank you very much.
And to Deborah, again, lots of curiosity is aroused by this. Okay.
Messineo, è molto comune.
Okay, now we have now we have a paper by Maria Grazia Galantino, who isn't here, but who's an associate professor in sociology at the Department of Social Science and Economics at the Sapienza University in Rome. But we do have Francesca Messineo, I said that right, who's a doctoral candidate in the same department, and she now has the floor.
Thank you.
Well, I enjoy to say that Maria Grazia says hello to everybody and was sad not to be here. Our presentation is titled Past Migration and Current Challenges to Integration, the Chilean Migration in Italy. Why I can't go? I have a problem with the slides. Okay, this way, perfect. So we start from the premise that the debate on migration often tend to emphasize the newness, the novelty, let's say, of these processes. But have a look and study old migratory patterns can also help us to identify long-term trajectories and parallel processes that connect the past to the future. In fact, following the literature, we can identify the assimilationist approach, the studies on transnationalism and diaspora, the trajectory of the second generation as we saw today, and the impact of racial exclusion. And among the many topics, we decide to look specifically at citizenship and how representation of past and present migration has changed and contributes to modify our understanding of this category. Of course, citizenship is a multidimensional concept that has a formal and institutional and legal meaning, but has also a social meaning. In fact, on a socio and anthropological perspective, we can say that citizenship has to be intended as the way in which everyday values and practice are elaborated in everyday life, so determining also individual access to different resources, and it has therefore a relational dimension and connected to the ways in which social relations are shaped by the relation, between individuals, institutions, and collective actors. Moreover, another important topic is the increasing importance of multiple citizenship in the current days. So it's important to question both the policies concerning citizenship acquisition, but also the individual feelings of belonging and attachment to different states. Well, moving from this premise, we will present the case of the Chilean diaspora in Italy that was among the first extra-European community, I don't like very much this word, but well, population of immigrants in Italy, and a diaspora, of course, triggered by the military golpe. I will discuss this case study in terms of historical trajectories, socio-demographic characteristics, presence and activism in the public sphere, and also their possibilities for integration in the Italian society. We combine different data sources, so we use both secondary data from the literature. I conducted qualitative interviews, and we also use quantitative data. I'm an anthropologist, so a bit tolerant. I did very simple analysis on this data because there are, as Deborah explained very well, I tried to combine the data from Istat so that register only the Chilean citizen, and the data from a survey a non-representative survey, unfortunately, realized by the Statistic Agency of Chile, that made this survey on the population living abroad, and they have a sample of 1,000 more or less respondents for Italy, so it's still a good number. So we decided to explore this data as best as we could. Well, a first relevant element is the long-lasting relations connecting the Italian and the Chilean society. We had many relations at the inter-parties level, so the Catholic Democratic parties, the exchange of intellectuals during the Allende government, the affinity between the democratic path to socialism and the historical compromise by the Communist Party, and I mean the list can really go on, but I'll try to stay brief. Then, well, indeed, the history of Chilean migration in Italy starts in 1973 with the exile, and the presence of Chileans in Italy was importantly determined by the activism of the diplomatic institution, Italian institutions in Chile. They host and help escaping between 2,000 and 3,000 individuals that arrived in Italy. At that time, Italy had signed the Geneva Convention on Asylum, but they had not removed the geographical constraint. So only people from Europe can get asylum in Italy. That's why, to deal with this situation, arose a sort of an extra legal category that in the literature is called the diplomatic asylum, that was specifically applied to Chileans and then also Argentinian and other nationality from Latin America escaping the dictatorships, indeed. So despite all the difficulties, Chileans are exiled that arrived by means of diplomatic channels. They were granted eventually with unlimited permits of stay, and they also got some facilities for accessing the labor market. The Chileans that arrive outside from the diplomatic channels, they were tolerated, but they were not granted the status and all the related rights. This experience is interesting also because it opened up the debate for the removal of the geographical constraint that was finally approved in 1990 with the Legge Martelli. That was also one of the preconditions, if I'm not wrong, for the that allow Italy to sign up the Schengen Agreement. Those are the Chilean data. The blue line is the global flow, the red line is the Italian flow. The Chilean immigration keep going on during the 80s due to the political repression and the economic crisis. Overall, the entire dictatorship is estimated that 1 million Chileans left the country, and only a minimum percentage reached Italy. What is more interesting that in counter trend, if compared with global flows, the immigration to Italy increased after the end of the dictatorship in 1989. This is an interesting data because the common sense idea here is that all the Chileans are exiles, but that's not true because in fact 75% of them arrived after 1989 and 30% of them arrived after 2005. The main driver for their immigration in Italy, where is the? Ooh. Oh, well, I lost the slide. The main driver for these have been family reasons and educational reasons. Family reasons suggest that origin search may have played a role, and educational reasons is a common cause for migration for Chileans, and the literature maintains that the mixture of economic and cultural goals are the motivation for going studying abroad. And if we look at the data by ISTAT, 7% of Chileans have a permit to stay for educational reasons, while this is the reason for the permit for 1.5% of the average of the extra-EU population in the country. I'm sorry for the missing slide. Anyway, today, the Chilean population in Italy varies very much if we look at the Italian data or the Chilean estimation. And Deborah explained very well, because Italian data, they don't take into account binational citizens or the origin of people. The Chileans are mainly located in the north. There is a slight feminization of this population, and they constitute an older population here, especially if compared with other groups. Here we can notice like it's almost inversely proportional. Like we have 20% of Chileans, those are the Italian data, that are older than 60, and 7%, 8% of them that are younger than 17, while for the non-EU citizen in general is exactly the opposite. But if we look at the Chilean data, we can see that the group age are much more balanced. So it's also my stance that is important to look at double nationalities and origins to really understand the composition of those groups. Yeah, they are also well educated. Here I use the available data on working population in Italy, and we can see that the educational level of Chileans are higher than the one of other migrants group, but are also higher than the one of the Italians. They are also well integrated in the labor market. 45% of them work in education, public administration, or social health services. So professions that, well, apart from the health social services, professions that are not very common among immigrants. And they are well integrated. Here is the missing slide. They are also, there is a problem with this. Yeah, well, they are also integrated in the local milieu. In fact, an indicator for this that we will see also later if we have time is the high number of Chilean immigrants that have got the Italian citizenship by means of marriage. Let's go to civic participation, another factor that in our opinion is important when we consider, in order to understand the processes driving integration. Historically, the Chilean diaspora has been very highly politicized, and there is a huge amount of literature about that, and study political relations among the Chilean exiles and the groups in the different countries of residence. And Italy played an important role in this process. We can just mention the Association Chile Democrático and the other processes. I mean, I will not go through this story, otherwise the 4 minutes left will be definitely not enough. I will quote Maria Rosaria Stabili, saying that the experience of the Chilean exile in Italy seems to have revived an old notion of citizenship built on the individual active participation to the political life of the host community. According to this view, the concept of citizenship is understood as an horizontal bind which does not constrain each citizen to the sovereignty of the state, but rather binds all the citizens together. So that's very important for us, like the idea of horizontal and informal practices of citizenship that we may maintain have an impact still today, because today civic participation of Chileans in Italy remains quite high. I will go very fast through the driver for the integration. Of course, the age composition, so the fact that they have been in Italy already for a long time can be important. The high socioeconomic status that is often previous to migration is also important. The mixed marriages is an important factor of integration, and the possibility to acquire the Italian citizenship that has an impact on first migrants that took the experience by themselves, and for the second and third generation. Well, that's still on quarter nationality. We can say among the second generations, more than 80% of them have the Italian citizen, and only 15 don't have it. I mean, yeah, those are estimations, so you have to take as they are. It's also interesting that they have quite positive self-perceptions about their integration process in Italy, but I don't have time to go through this slide. So to conclude, we can say that in the past, perception of proximity that were mainly politically driven, but also linked to ethnic, religious, and cultural factors, have enlarged the possibility of this population for social inclusion. They have been considered at that time as people in need, but they were also recognized as actors with a sort of independent agency, something that is very different from what happened today with refugees. And the fact that they were recognized facilitate their inclusion in the public sphere, and the enhancement of these horizontal practices of citizenship, whose consequences are still visible nowadays, on my opinion and my findings. And today, unfortunately, we observe different representations. We have processes of selective memories and forgetfulness that promote a hierarchical difference between the old migrants and the new migrants. So in this way, we draw a sharp line between the newcomers and the natives that grow to include also old migrants. The current discourses about the past justifies narrative of exclusion that emphasize the presumed unity of the native community and the native culture in opposition to the newcomers that are also very commonly associated with Muslim, whatever. Okay. Muslim migration and the crisis of multiculturalism in the West. So in this process, also citizenship is reframed more and more often as a problem of cultural norms rather than civic, political, and social rights. So we can see from the Chilean experience that on that case, we had actors that were not formal citizens, but they were empowered by the possibility to enact practices of citizenship. Nowadays, unfortunately, so my conclusion won't be positive either, unfortunately, we increasingly say foreign citizens that formally hold the status, but they are prevented from benefit from citizenship rights due to discrimination and racialization. And I conclude, sorry, I ran a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. Another paper that underlines, highlights the complexity of the notion of citizenship.
Okay.
You know Paolo from this morning. He's a professor of economic history at Bicocca University in Milan, and he has the floor for today's final presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. This is the final cut. I know you are tired, but so I am quick. Okay, so the aim is to study the migration flows from Moldova or Moldavia. Is a particular country becoming independent in 1991. And it belonged before at the former Soviet Union. It is interesting for some aspect. In my analysis is statistical analysis and cultural analysis, explaining what happens in the migration flows in 25 years. So I save for you all the rest, because I know, and some data about Moldova. So Moldova, the dimension are 33,000 kilometers squares. That is Belgium more Luxembourg. So you understand what I think. And it's important to note that you have immediately, when finish the Soviet power, you have two great waves of migration. One wave was toward to Ukraine and Russian Federation, okay, and the other ways was toward to Germany and Romania, in general, European Union. Attention, when I indicate European Union, is not Romania in the United States, okay? So is Germany, France, but in particular, Germany was the most important destination for people coming from Ukraine. It's important to note that there's a difference between the language. That is, people speaking Romanian language, that is 70% of Moldova, prefer to go to Romania and in general in Western Europe. People speaking Russian or the minority of Ukrainian language prefer transfer themselves to Ukraine and Russia. And we noted that Russian people representing 10% and Ukraine 11%. Attention, in this case, this is the last census in Soviet Union. So you have to remember that after the independence, you have the separation by Transnistria, that is populated by Russian-speaking people. Okay, and it's important to remember another wave important, that is for people having the best professional skills, USA. And in particular, is important for the percentage, not for the absolute number, but for percentage is the share of the percentage, sorry, of Jewish people. Because in this case, with the law of the return, is announced law in 1950, all people having Hebrew religion could also now can go to Israel and obtain the citizenship. This is very important because in the case of Moldova, this reduced at 1,000 people, and before they were 65,000 people. So it's a strong reduction in percentage. Almost all the people having Hebrew origins decided to go to Israel. Okay, and it's important. This I underline in this moment. It's important that you have official data, but Moldova, together to Ukraine and Belarus, are the European countries where you have less official data in comparison the total of people that decided to leave the country, in particular during the 90s. Okay, so you have a great relevance of illegal trafficking. Okay, and in this case you have the typical case of people that is exploited in underpaid activities or in prostitution. In this case, and why I underline this, because I explain only the data is important, because if you consider the census of 2004, you have that 12% of the population is not in Moldova. You have a decreasing of the total population of 12%. Okay, and if you consider the succeed census, this diminution arrive almost 20%. So this means that in 25 years, you have a reduction of 20% of Moldovan population. Okay, and this data did not consider that a lot of people change and transfer in Romania. We will see in particular after the entry of Romania in European Union. And in this case, you have not an official immigration, but an immigration de facto. Okay, and this is very important because you have, this is one of the countries that in the last year in Europe lost more inhabitants. Okay, and why this? Here you have the data concerning Jewish people. Okay, so you can note they were 65,000 and now they have 1,600. It's okay. And not now, in 2014, because they probably that diminution continue. Okay, and why this? If you study Moldova, you have the occasion to study what happens in Europe, in European countryside in the 50s. So you have in a machine of time 60 years after. And this is very important because Moldova has another particular characteristics. Is in Europe the country with more people in the countryside, 60%. So this puts Moldavia in the top 10 in the world concerning the percentage of the people living countryside. This is very important because we will see now. The quality of life in the countryside in Moldova during the 90s and also in the new millennium was very low, and is the same situation of the countryside that you study when you study the common agricultural policies in Europe in the 50s. So you have different policies. In Europe, you have the policies to increase the the quality of the life in countryside to maintain people in the countryside. In Moldova, well, we have not this policy, and so this create more migration flow. Okay, so you have here this is very important. Here is not a Schengen zone, but the right to this is not correct phrase because Romania is not in Schengen zone, but by 2002 you can go in Schengen zone in Europe by Romania, in particular by 2004 using Hungary. It's okay, but this was important because for people that decided to go to Europe, the way became easy when you arrive in the new millennium. And this changed data because more people decided to go to Romania. This is important for the quality of life of people living in Moldova, but created a lot of problems for data, statistical data, because we assisted to a disappear of data concerning most of people go to Romania. So in this moment, if you analyze data, you discover that the most of migrants are towards to Russian Federation and Ukraine. It's not real, but in this case also Eurostat has a wrong data because they don't consider all people working in Romania. It's okay, and this is the history. You have also the problem concerning Transnistria, okay, and this is a problem for data because you have no data concerning Transnistria. But for migration, this is not so relevant because few people decide to migrate in the new millennium from Transnistria, and in any case, they went to Ukraine and moreover in Russian Federation. It's okay. But is important, I also noticed that you have a great percentage, but is doped. So a lot of people went officially to Russian Federation, but in this data, you have people living in Transnistria. So this is create a doping for data. And I asked to European Parliament, to Eurostat, they answered me that it's not possible to verify. So I asked to Minister in Moldova, but Moldova did not recognize Transnistria, but they have no data concerning Transnistria. So we have a particular condition. In any case, this is the most important things that I have to explain. Well, the real change is not only concerning the destination. So if you compare the 90s with the new millennium, you have a great increase of destination towards European Union, dreaming Europe. On the contrary, in the 90s, you have Ukrainian, Russian Federation, USA, Israel, okay? And it's important to note that in that period, you have a change in policy in Moldova. Moldova from 2001 and 2009 was the only one European countries where the Communist Party had the power, okay? And this pushed the immigration to Europe. When, with a similar process that you, in this month, you study for Ukraine, you have the same history. In 2009, the communist president decided to stop relationship with the European countries, and you have riots and violence, and you have new election, and this new election, all the other parties are grouping and won the election, and so policy changes. But this change also the policy in Ukraine, and so now we analyze all what happens to change the immigration flow and to explain what happens to remittance. So I have 5 minutes for this. Okay. So now I read. The new government began a slow process aiming the elimination of reasons pushing people to leave the country, in particular the renovation of public institutions and the destination of public investment. Okay, you are in 2009 and following years. So new laws favor the capital increase and the control on banks, insurance, and other financial activities. They in fact had to support small and medium-sized enterprises producing high-quality goods, in particular in new sectors as automation and ICT, or operating in logistics, in particular to improve market relations between European Union countries and Ukraine and Russian Federation. Okay, so Moldova took profit by this position, by its position. At the same time, new investments were dedicated to the renovation of the educational system. Why this? Because before you have the Soviet system, and renovate the educational system means copy the Romanian system. This is very important because if you now you have your graduation is similar to European graduation, so easy to recognize this. In the past, we will see when I explain the difference from male immigration and female immigration, you have a lot of people that was graduation, okay, all as nurses or doctors, and they have no recognized in Europe. And so oblige these people to become caregivers, okay? In Italian language, badanti. And at this regard, financial aids were addressed to improve rural productivity, and rural productivity allowed to increase the quality of life on the countryside. So what produce Moldova? Cereals and wine and some fruits. I remember that wine and fruits are high value-added products for agriculture, and the quality of life in the countryside. And also to develop, this is the new in 2000 now, the local tourism. So new innovative, unique hotellerie based on thermal baths or visit of ancient castles. Okay, this was the news. Furthermore, new rules giving more control of the local judicial system, including the external evaluation of judges. So, in this moment, our referendum, okay, were promulgated to avoid the existing corruption and by this way to create an appealing business environment for foreign investors. So these data were attracted not only by a low labor cost, it's okay, but also by a workforce owning good professional skills and the presence of an efficient administration. All this means that if you consider remittance, we can note that you have a strong decreasing, these are the remittance, when you have Romanian entering in Europe, because we don't consider all money coming from Romania, and also the fact that you have a reduction in migration flow. It's okay. And it's very important in any case to consider that these data are not so correct. Why? Because a part of the money coming from migrants to the native country, to Moldova, did not arrive with official way. For example, you have money transfer agency, 40%, banks, 22%, and all the rest is not official. You have also by the post office, you have only 5% that is recognized. In the other case, it's not possible because you have the packages with goods and money. It's okay. So if you added this, you know that 1/4 of the money that Romania received arrived by no official way. That is giving money to train conductor, to bus conductor, or a member of the family or a cousin that went to Moldova region for Christmas, etc., etc. So, and it's very important, the absence of people working in Romania. Okay, and Romania is very important because a lot of people work in Romania and come come back home 1 week, every week, or every 2 weeks, or every month, but they are not considered officially migrants for Eurostat. It's okay. And now the last is a particular things that distinguish Romania, Moldova from the other countries. You have the age and gender. 65% of Moldovan Greens were less than 39 years old. And people from 20 to 20 years old represented more than 23%. This is a great problem from the perspective of Moldova. You lost young generation. And very particular, migration flows involved men and women who are employed in all productive sectors. In Moldova, all people immigrating with very different educational skills. You have people coming from rural area, they have only the low level of instruction, and people with graduation, okay? But it's very important for women found new job in Western way as maids and caregivers for all people, in particular until 2009, okay? Moreover, when they were nurses, sometimes doctors, rarely, and their degrees was not recognized by European public institution. And it's very important to remember this, female migration were greatest than male one. It's not a normal condition in the world. And if you consider the ratio, in 2010, you have the ratio women-men is 120%. So every 5 men, you have 6 women. It's a very particular thing. It's the only state in Europe with this condition, and that is women that stay abroad and send money at home. It's okay? And as I finished, you can discuss of other, but I think is enough as the time. It's okay?
Okay, thank you very much. Before giving some time to questions, I've been asked to tell you that for tonight's dinner, we will meet at the entrance gate to the castle at 7:30. So be there and be punctual, and then we will walk down to the town center for dinner, correct? Okay. Questions for that?
I have some notes, comments more than questions, or general questions. For example, for Julia. So what about the selectivity of migrants in Japan? I mean, given that there are few immigrants yet, so are they selected in some way? So for example, I see from your scheme that the level of education tends to be quite high, it seems to me, if I'm not wrong. Another point is that I was quite surprised that there is no control by government for compulsory schools, so not compulsory school for migrants, but it means at any level. So also for primary school, wow. So the question, one question arises. So, but is the Japan government? So is the government aware of the need of migration? I mean, the demographic situation of the Japan is not the best in the world. So I'm just so what is the debate in Japan about migration? So I don't know if you have some notes. Of course, it's a quite complicated stuff, but I don't know if you have your perception. For Deborah, I know of one project made by ISTAT, and in particular by Cinzia Conti, Okay, you know that project. No, it's only Cinzia Conti. So she's responsible for a project. I'm marginally involved in the project, so this is why I know it. In which Cinzia and her groups tried to link permessi di soggiorno with census, with population register, with anagrafe, in order to create longitudinal data for those who acquire citizenships. I think that so they already have this data, but forget to have the microdata. It's possible, but it is possible to work with them and ask for specific elaborations. I think that most of the information that you need, I'm not sure, but most of the information that you need are collected in that linkage. And I don't think that they published only a small part of the data that they have. So I don't know, it can be interesting, for example, to check. And so finally, just one comment for Paolo. So Moldova, so it's interesting, you know, young people, so very strong out-migration made by young couples, women in particular. And also Moldova is one of the countries with the lowest fertility rate in Europe and then in the world. So I think that the demographic situation of Moldova is very risky, so it's very particular. So of course, it's an additional factors that it's no in-migration, very low fertility rate and very strong, very high out-migration. So it's an additional point for the future of that country that is a little bit problematic. That's all, thank you.
Francesca.
Okay, just not really questions, but just clarifications, let's say. Julia, I think this is a silly question, but are foreigners allowed to attend Japanese schools, first of all, which I think the answer is yes. And do you have any idea about how many foreigners choose a Japanese school? Because that would be interesting. Like, is that schools for foreigners just regard, you know, a small percentage, like 5% of the foreigners, or it's something that everybody chooses as a foreigner? That would be interesting to know. And as Francesca, about the Chileans in Italy, where you were saying about the high educational level of people from Chile. Well, I had a student from Chile this year, and he wrote a paper about Chile and education. And I learned, I didn't know, that the people from Chile are among the most educated people in Latin America. And so I was wondering, maybe they also imported with them this attitude towards education and having, you know, good education, so going to university and so on. So maybe that the data we're showing is not so surprising if you think of their attitude at home too. But I don't know, it's just an idea. And Paolo, do you know anything about the use of remittances, Paolo, up to 2008? That would be interesting. And did you consider that also maybe the 2008 crisis had an impact on the decrease in the migration rate? That's it. Thank you.
Question, I don't know if it's a question, but Paolo, because Paolo, I know you use a census and it's difficult to, but I am interested in, like in the history case, to know if the immigration was only individual, but only community, because in the case of Dalmine or other case of firm, we have studied the entire community change. And in this case, Romania from the Eastern SU, Union Soviet, there is case of immigration of community, skill community, and I'm interested not in only individual but person and the relationship with the community and the skills and particularly Jewish, in the history, Jewish immigrant, not a singular person, but entire community from one town to another town after history of the Jews is, you know. So this is, do we have information or indication about this immigration community, not only person?
Question or?
I have only one question for Giulia. If you find any, if you find that any theoretical model can already existing for second generation migrants can in some ways explain your case.
Other questions? Francesca.
Well, thank you. I have a comment for Deborah because she asked about it explicitly. So, for me, it's actually a bit problematic to talk about descendants in the case of in which you have one parent that is naturalized and the other one that is foreign, because I think, of course, you have many possibilities, but I think it can be often that one of the parents get the Italian citizenship because of residence. So he has been staying here for 15 years, then maybe the wife arrived, the children arrived. So let's say, a bit stereotyped, sorry, but like the father got the citizenship first and then the other will follow in time. So I don't know if I would consider them all as this descendant. And also to make things even more problematic, like in the case of Chile, for instance, but I think that it's the same also for Brazilian or Argentinians, you also have a lot of descendants without citizenship. They arrive here for the purpose to go through all the documentation for achieving the citizenship, because maybe their parents never thought about this possibility and they never applied. So that's, I don't know, for my experience and my qualitative case study, that's what I would say, but it's a really work in progress, very much work in progress.
Maybe stay here.
Okay.
Other questions?
So yeah, I don't want to go too much onto Julia, but I have studied this topic a little bit. I just wondered, is it slightly complicated because you had Chinese, Brazilians, and Koreans, and they've gone through such different periods of integration, you know, rejection, and the Japanese state has played them, included them, excluded them. So I just wondered about clarifying sort of what you mean by integration in the sense that now a lot of Koreans, the Osaka Koreans, they're very proud of K-pop, Korean dramas, and they don't necessarily see integration as being with the Japanese state, as being with the Japanese. They're very proud of themselves and gravitate towards Korea, whereas at one time there was a lot of self-hatred. So I just wondered how you seem to be saying. So I just seem to be at one time they went through a period of self-hatred, but now they're sort of very the opposite way of Korean culture is being on the world stage. So I wondered how you saw integration. Do you mean getting jobs within Japan doing well? And I just want, my colleague I just finished working with her on a project. She's from Transnistria. She even worries that Moldova will survive I was just wondering what your feeling is having studied it. She said, basically her family is Russian. She gravitates towards Russian culturally, but she hates Russia politically. And the criminals and crooks, she says, runs it. She hated Zelensky's government before this happened as a bunch of Western crooks, and she hates the Moldovan government. She now has Portuguese nationality and lives in Lisbon. She said, that's the best I can do. I don't mind Portugal. Food is good, weather is good. She said, but I have no feeling for it. You know what I mean? It's almost like the case that you said, it's just a place which is better than the mess it is. And she said, I don't see it. I don't see it really surviving. But is she being extreme from
Other questions? I just have two quick comments, one for Julia, but it's part of something that's already been said. I mean, I understand that the Koreans and so on can decide to attend. Okay, but if I understand correctly, that the schools for foreigners, they seem to be subject to no type of administrative control at all. Okay, but are they accredited? I mean, do the qualifications one earns, are they recognized by Japanese institutions, employers, and so on? I assume so, because the instrumental dimension seems to be strong, but it seems like there's a bit of a tension, a contradiction there. I also have a comment for Deborah, because the entire set of research questions seems to be geared to other problems in educational experience and educational integration that we might be underestimating due to the facts that you explore. But from this point of view, at least for those who are at least 15 years old, could you not also incorporate their status as students or non-students to understand if you don't have that information? You already answered. Okay, so.
Well, I only have a question to answer, so very fast. Chile is a very weird country somehow, and you can see from what has happening in those last years. You have macroeconomic indicators that look like the country is doing very well, and then if you dig a bit under the soil, you see a very different picture. So it's true that they have a high educational level, but it's also true that they are among the countries that have the biggest private debt. And the education system is more or less like the US one, with you get a huge debt to study. And so that's also problematic, and that's also that it's an important reason. Indeed, the literature I mentioned is a case study from Argentina, where there are a lot of Chilean students because they try to avoid this debt by migrating for schooling purposes. And yeah, it's not surprised that Chileans in Italy have a high educational level. It's not at all, also because the majority of the old migrants were in politics, so were a different level, but they were educated, and the new migrants migrate a lot for education, so it's straightforward. But it's impressive the difference compared with other migrants and even compared with the Italian population. So that's why I decided to insert this figure in the picture, because it was a bit impressive to me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So thank you for your questions, and I acknowledge the fact that the context is so different from what we're used to. So I kind of always have this trouble of having to contextualize what I'm talking about to an audience that is usually not very familiar with the geographical area. So for Roberto's questions, like about the selectivity, there is a strong selectivity. It's not about educational credentials. It is mainly about occupation. So low skilled immigrants have difficulties entering the country, and usually higher skilled people are allowed and are even welcomed. So you have all, I mean, like professors and such. Universities are really not trying to attract foreign talents, for instance, but then you have experts in chemicals or whatever. They are very welcome, whereas low-skilled migrants are not. However, in 2019, a new bill passed allowing, for instance, what is called, it's our circular migration. So they opened fixed numbers for a fixed number of immigrants to be inserted in hotel and restaurants sector, in construction, in heavy industries and so on to stay. And they made this new ad hoc visa, which lasts for 5 years. With this visa, you're not entitled for family reunification, for instance. So it's a very functional to the labor market unbalance that they have right now. And this very much mirrors the European situation of the 80s. And this is what you also, Paolo, said before about Moldova being a time machine to see what was back. I also would argue that Japan is a time machine, and we're going back to the European situation like 30 years ago. So that's pretty interesting. So that's the first point of selectivity. And the other is, for example, Brazilian. Actually, Brazilian is a population showing low occupational positioning. They even enter with very low skilled credentials. But then there was this in the 90s, one of the immigration control law was that until the third generation, descendants of Japanese would be allowed to stay in the country, even without a secured working position. And that was the tricky part of it. So many Brazilian entered because they were like second generation Japanese or third generation Japanese, but they didn't speak any Japanese at all. They were not familiar with Japanese rules, and they were loud. They didn't respect rules. They didn't know how to throw garbage. Like that was the main issues about Brazilian immigrants. That's very curious, but this is still up to date. I mean, still today, if you're third generation descendant from a Japanese person, then you can stay in the country. They look, actually, they're like most of them, they could pass as Japanese. Yeah, definitely. And that goes back to, Japan being an homogeneous country and wanted to preserve the purity of the race and so on. So this is all a very wide topic that maybe we can discuss over dinner or not. So yeah, there's no control for compulsory. Like if you don't have a Japanese citizenship, the government is not going to knock at your door and say, okay, why is your child not at school right now? That is why basically children can just go to a foreign school without being controlled, and I mean without being checked from the local or national government, mainly local. And but among my sampling, for instance, everybody completed the compulsory education, which means everybody finished at least middle school, junior high school. So that was already good. And when you said does the government look at what needs are there? You mean school-wise, in the school arena? Because that connects to what
where they need migration for their class.
So, for example, adults so that they know they need. So that's why also that things change in 2019, as I just said. They open to low-skilled visa. They are very, very aware. Also, Japan is presenting. Before we were talking about convergence. Your husband maybe were talking about, laughing a little bit about convergence, but that's what's happening in Japan, like the aging population, mismatched labor market. These are all characteristics that Europe and North America is presenting, and Japan too. So, and Japan is very, very well aware of the fact that they lack labor force and so on, and migrants can be a very easy, let's say, solution if they're able to accept foreigners in the country. I mean, to physically and daily live with foreigners, you know. But in schools, and that links me to what Professor Francesca asked me, like how many foreigners choose a Japanese school. That's very difficult to investigate, because in school actually there's no statistics citizenship wise on who's in school. But from 2003-2006, actually, the government started a language support, Japanese language support program in public schools, so that children that are in need for extra language support can be taught, like in after school classes, or they just during school time they just are taken out of the class and brought in a separate classroom with other foreigners that cannot speak Japanese, and they have like 2 hours of Japanese per week. And so finally from 2003, that's from junior high school, and 2006 that was implemented also in a senior high school. You have numbers of official statistics of how many children are in need of Japanese language support. And that is how many foreign citizen students are in need of a Japanese language support. But you have also data of how many Japanese citizen students are in need of Japanese language support. And that brings back to what Deborah is actually researching right now, because that means that naturalized children, or as in Japan, you have yusanguinis, how many like children of mixed couple actually are not proficient in Japanese, and they are in need of support to go through their scholastic path somehow, or they just need language support. So this is one of the program, but all the youth I interviewed that attended the Japanese public schools said that program is not enough at all to learn and to be proficient in Japan and to go through history class, especially history classes, because you have old names that you have to memorize, and you cannot really know how, like I don't know if you're familiar with Japanese, you have kanji, and then you have the phonetic alphabet, and you have a lot of names. You cannot just guess what the names can be read. Like, what's the phonetic reading of that? You have to learn and memorize by heart. By heart, is it said in? Yeah. And I will leave Alicia's question for last. I will go fast. Okay, sorry. And about Mark's question, yes, it is a little bit chaotic, because these 3 groups arrive different stages, historical stages, political stages, and within different conditions. And I mean, the Chinese that are now in Japan are actually also second generation of new immigrants. So not necessarily those coming from the post-migration period after the colonization of Asian region. The thing you said about Korean, though, is true. Like, they are the descendants of those post-migrants back at the early 20th century. And they went through waves of discrimination and so on. And even like 4th generation can still feel, especially if they talk about with grandparents, they are passed, like, stories of discrimination are passed through the grandchildren. And this was especially patent because I also investigated identity formation and how participants self-assess their own identity. And none of them define themselves as Japanese. I mean, third generation people none of them said, I feel Japanese or half Japanese. I feel, and there's a Japanese expression that goes Zainichi Korean, which means Korean that resides in Japan, So I think that's also a very strong indicator of like how difficult it is. Sorry, and with integration, I simply use the word integration as it is used in like migration theory. So getting closer to the average Japanese citizen in the educational, occupational, even identity in this case sense. That's how I use the integration here. And the things about credentials of ethnic schools. It depends from school to school. It depends if schools are recognized by the central government. Usually Brazilian schools are not, for instance. So students graduating from a Brazilian school, they have to get their own diploma translated into Japanese and recognized by like the officials as if they graduated back in Brazil. So it's like for them moving into Japan once again, if they want to be admitted to a Japanese university, for instance. And with the Korean situation is a little bit even more complicated, because along the years, when there are tensions between Japan and Korea and North Korea especially, usually funds get revoked from school, and like the school lose the official recognition by the government, and that means that the school is not a school, it's just like a normal firm or company and not an educational institute. So it doesn't get recognized, and they have to do the same thing they do with for the Brazilian, basically. So that's an extra difficulty for them. Also, it is costly because it has to be a legal translation. And the last question, of course, the most important for my project is whether the integration of immigrants, of youth of immigrant origin in Japan can be read through any existing theoretical model. I would say yes, but of course I didn't present today which one. But for those that are familiar with, I would go with the Albanese new assimilation, because I did see that like upward mobility, socioeconomic mobility is there, like it has a generational pace. So the thing that I would say that the simulation theory would work, but the new assimilation theory also recalls for what's called institutional mechanism. So what I saw is basically there, for example, the fact that foreign students are do not have to abide to the compulsory schooling, for instance, and the fact that they have a whole ethnic school path virtually excludes them with the possibility other students have. And so because this new assimilation theory, Albanese, take into account what's institutional in the institutional framework, I would say I would go with this theoretical model. But I don't think the typology alone can explain it. I mean, alongside the dissertation, I go also with the linguistic adaptation and I take into account other factors. So yeah, so thank you for asking though. And sorry for taking a long time.
As Deborah want to... No, there was another question, if I remember correctly, from Roberto. I don't remember what it was. Okay.
So I finish. Paolo. So I finish, and yes, low fertility, but Moldova is a fantastic example for economic historians to see how you can destroy a state. So you have a free crisis because it's the only one state in Europe and probably in the world that you have the economic disaster concerning when you finish to stay under Soviet Union, you have a strong privatization without the European aid. Besides, you are the only one state in former Soviet Union without raw materials. Because if you are Ukraine, so Russian Federation, you have Ukraine, you have raw materials. You have no raw materials in Moldova. So you have first economic disaster, and I linked the question made by Valerio. When I underlined Ivrio, the Jewish people that left, you have one of the most important people for high professional skills that left Moldavia. So, and they all left, and moreover, in this case, you have the money that come back to Moldova, because in this case, if all Jews disappear, you have the remittances. So in this case, it was a tragedy during the 90s. Okay, so second disaster is the only one state in Europe that in the new millennium had a communist party that reproposed the worst of the communist policies, creating a new disaster and refusing European aid. So you have the protest and riots. So, and I forget, you have also 1 year of war in 91, 92, because when it's raining a lot in this case. Okay, so after, and it's okay, I forgot, but it was right, it was written, you have also the 2008 financial crisis, and this eliminates some jobs in Western Europe. Okay, in this case, it's not so dramatic because you have a network. So, for example, why I can study the case of Romania if I have the possibility to analyze this in Eurostat, World Bank, and all this statistics data. There are the case of Romania. Why I can? Because, why can I? Because I have some students that coming from Moldova in Milan, and so I ask them and their family what happens in the last 20 years. Because they are the second generation, the first generation arrived in Milan, and so for me, I discovered that a lot of parents, a lot of friends are in Romania, but they did not exist, and also in this moment, they don't exist in statistical data. So you have this particular condition concerning the skill is fantastic because you have the immigration of doctors, of people with very high professional skills, and also people without professional skills. Okay, and remember that we don't understand what happens in illegal migration. In this case, it's not 1–2%. The hypothesis is that 1 on 6 is illegal from Moldova. Okay, is the record together with Belarus. Okay, so it's very interesting for me. I started to study before the war 2 years ago during the pandemic COVID. So now the problem is, and the perspectives are dramatic. Because yes, low fertility, because in the countryside is the poorest in Europe. You have problem of, I indicate here, you have problem concerning water supply. And also only in the last 10 years, it's possible to change something. But here you have no facilities and public services in rural areas. No sewerage, I don't know the pronouns, fognature in Italian language. So there are in the 90s and also until 2005, okay? You have no water supply. So you have to bring water not in your house. You have a limitation for electricity. This, it's evident, is not a good message for young generation. And yes, you have low fertility because if you have the young generation, 1 on 3, sometimes 2 on 5, so 40%, that decided to leave your country, also the low fertility is one of the typical results. So exists for every country, yes, a network very important, and so you can find Moldovan people in Romania and in some towns in Italy, in Germany, etc. This is a typical, normal. In this case, you have not a factory. For example, I remember our colleagues that study Spanish people working to Volkswagen. Even the number did not allow to characterize the immigration in one particular firm. But you have, in any case, a network arriving. And if Valerio is interesting, I have some students that can explain with their family how it's possible to study. For me, it was not important, but it's interesting for others to study the way to arrive in Milan and also in Germany. Okay, I finish because it's late, and all people is happy if I finish. Okay.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for the speakers. We had some very interesting
Thank you to Rosa
papers,
Maria.
and we had also a very fruitful discussion. And I noticed in closing that one of the recurrent themes this afternoon was the lack of reliable and complete data. And in closing, this reminds me of an old joke. There are two types of people: those who know how to draw valid conclusions from incomplete data. That's it.
Yes.
See you later or see you tomorrow.
Yes. So, we have to say hello. Eleonora Kappa, Rosa Maria and Federica, they resist all the time. So congratulations for these three that they resist.